Hi. Arizona, July 1879. Weston Hayes stepped out of the stable when he heard the scream. Raw and jagged, not from fear but fury. Around the saloon's corner, a man had a woman pinned against the alley wall. Her dress hung in tatters. Blood on her cheek. She hurled a bourbon bottle at him. It shattered against the stone, missing him by inches. The man grabbed her by the throat. Weston didn't reach for his revolver. He just stepped between them. "Try someone your own size," he said, his voice calm. "Try me." The man's fist curled, muscles tense. For a second, it seemed he'd swing. But something in Weston's stare stopped him. The man's shoulders sagged. He backed off into the dark. The woman stared at Weston with something between defiance and disbelief. "I don't need saving," she said. "I'm not saving you," Weston replied. "I just can't stand watching someone break a woman who's already survived more than most." Weston Hayes was born beneath a sycamore tree in Virginia, but he stopped calling it home the day he watched Union smoke rise over the hills and carry his mother's voice away. By 17, he was in uniform, first gray, then blue when survival demanded it. After the war, he signed on as a scout for the cavalry, trading politics for survival. He had the eyes for it. Quiet, sharp, unblinking. Officers said he could track a feather through a sandstorm. His younger brother Caleb joined him 2 years in green, cheerful, fearless. He didn't last 6 months. It was Weston who found what was left of Caleb after a botched raid near the Rio Grande. Their column had been chasing shadows. Some whispered threat out past the dry mesas. Weston warned the major not to push further. "Too quiet," he said. "No bird sounds, no wind even." But command never did take advice from hired eyes. They rode into an ambush. Weston buried Caleb with his own hands, wrapped him in a soldier's coat. They'd both laughed at once. Then he quit the army without a word, left his scout's badge in the sand beside the grave, and didn't look back. Since then, he lived in motion, never stayed long in any town, mended fences, broke wild horses, guided lost cattle home for a few dollars and a nod. He slept under stars when the weather allowed, under porches when it didn't. No letters, no family, no roots. People asked him why he never settled, never married. He'd shrug and say, "I had a brother once. That was enough." But it wasn't about grief anymore. Not really. It was about something else, something harder to name. A distrust of permanence, of promises, of the quiet lies people told themselves just to sleep at night. So he kept moving. Arizona was just the latest stop. Some ranch job outside of Bisbee, a few days of brush clearing and livestock feeding. When he wasn't working, he fixed up the old stable behind the saloon, hammering boards back into place without being asked. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He just watched. Watched the way folks in town looked away from trouble. Watched the girl behind the boarding house limp with no one asking why. Watched the sheriff play cards while his deputy roughed up drunks in the alley. And then one day he heard a scream, and that was that. 3 mornings after the alley, Weston saw her again. He was sitting on the back stoop of the stable, sipping bitter coffee from a tin mug. The sky was still pink at the edges, and the desert hadn't yet turned cruel. Birds rustled in the mesquite. Hooves clopped faintly from the livery yard. It was a slow hour, one of the only times the town pretended to be gentle. Then came the cry. Not sharp, just soft, frightened, quickly muffled. Weston turned his head toward the butcher's porch. There, crawling out from underneath the slats, was a small barefoot boy. Dust clung to his knees. He wore no shirt, and his ribs showed clear. Behind him came the woman from the alley, tugging him gently by the wrist, whispering something to soothe him. Her dress was patched badly, frayed along the hem. Her eyes were sunken but alert. She looked thinner than before. Another child, a bit older, stood nearby watching Weston with narrowed eyes, one arm slung protectively in front of his little brother. "You following me now?" she asked when she noticed Weston sitting with his mug. "I didn't know you'd be here to follow." She scoffed and knelt beside the boy, brushing dirt from his back. The boy clung to her skirt. "You gonna stare all day or say something useful?" "You hungry?" Weston asked. She didn't answer. Neither did the boys. Names? He added. The older boy stepped forward. Eli, he said. The younger one just stared. The little one's Thomas, the woman said. They're mine. Both. Different fathers. Neither worth remembering. She turned as if that might end the conversation, but Weston didn't leave. He saw her again that evening, scrubbing pans behind the saloon. Her hands moved with practiced bitterness, fingers raw and red. She slept behind the old grain barn. The boys curled under a moth-eaten quilt. When it rained, they tucked themselves under a sheet of canvas nailed crookedly to the barn wall. Her boots were 3 sizes too big and held together with twine. On Sundays, she worked for a scrap plate at the church, but never sat through the sermon. Her name, Weston learned by listening, was Marin Holloway. The town called her other things. He watched her without watching. Left fresh apples near the fence post one day, jerky wrapped in oiled cloth the next. She never acknowledged them, but the offerings disappeared by morning. One night, as wind howled and dust swept through the alleyways, Weston dropped off a wool blanket behind the barn. He didn't knock, just folded it, laid it across the fence rail and walked away. The next day, someone left a slice of pie by his tools. Burnt crust. Too much sugar. He didn't mention it. Later that week, he carved a horse from a scrap of wood. Eli watched from a distance. Weston didn't speak, just finished it and set it near the boy. Eli picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and slipped it into his pocket like something sacred. That night, Marin approached. She leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed. You keep hanging around like you've got something to prove. Weston didn't look up. Don't have much to prove. You trying to save me? No. Then what are you doing? He stood, dusted his hands, and looked at her. I'm staying. She blinked like he'd said something offensive. Don't, she warned. Don't get comfortable. I've had enough men come and go. They always say just a while. Then start asking for pieces I'm not giving. I'm not asking. She narrowed her eyes. You think this is noble? Fixing a roof? Leaving food? You think a blanket and a wooden toy makes you different? I don't think anything, Weston said. I just do what feels right. And what do you feel now? I feel like you're someone who fought like hell to stay alive, he said. And I'd rather sit beside someone like that than anyone pretending to be whole. She laughed bitterly. I'm no virgin cowboy. I'm all scars. Weston stepped closer, the moonlight drawing lines across her face. I don't want a virgin, Marin, he said. I want the woman they tried to break and couldn't. She stared at him for a long time. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back to her boys. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. He stayed. Not for reward. Not out of pity. Just stayed. Each morning he showed up with something in hand. A tool, a bag of nails, a loaf of bread still warm from the bakery. He'd nod at Marin, tip his hat to the boys, and get to work. Never asked questions. Never expected thanks. He fixed what needed fixing. The fence that sagged behind the barn. The rusted hinges on the feed bin. The leak above their sleeping corner. A patch of weeds that scratched Thomas's feet when he ran. All of it handled quietly. Marin didn't stop him. She also didn't speak to him for days, not unless the boys were around. Then she'd offer a curt instruction or a sharp glance. Nothing more. But Weston didn't mind. He wasn't there to win her over. He was just there. Eli started following him. Not close, just within sight. Hovering like a wild dog, not sure if a hand would offer food or a whip. Weston began carving during breaks. Animals, shapes, toys. When Eli got brave enough, he asked questions. Weston answered without judgment. Taught him how to sand edges smooth. How to use the back of the blade, not the edge, for detail. Thomas would toddle over and plop down beside them, happy to be near someone who didn't yell. One evening, Marin came home with blood on her knuckles. Someone give you trouble? Weston asked. No, she said. Who bled then? She stared at him. A man at the carpenter's tried to corner me. You all right? He won't try again. He didn't press further. Another time, she found him hanging a new door on the barn. "You know how to do all this?" she asked, arms crossed. "Lived on enough land," he said. "You learn if you want to survive winter." "This isn't Virginia," she muttered. "No," he said, "but cold finds people, even here." That night, the wind howled hard enough to shake the barn walls. Weston stayed nearby, slept under the lean-to with his coat wrapped around him and his rifle across his chest. When Marin woke at dawn, she found a fresh stack of firewood, a dry tarp over the entrance, and a pot of coffee heating on stones. She didn't thank him, but she didn't stop him the next night either. Then came the blow. Marin missed a rent payment. Horace Banning, the station owner and unofficial landlord of half the town, took offense. Marin returned home with a bruise blooming across her cheek and a torn sleeve. Weston saw the damage. He said nothing at first. That night, after the boys were asleep, he rode into town and walked straight into the back of the general store. Banning sat there, cleaning his nails with a letter opener, smirking. "You here to pay her debts?" he asked. "No," Weston said. "I'm here to settle yours." Before Horace could stand, Weston grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into a sack of oats. The letter opener clattered to the floor. "You ever touch her again," Weston said, voice level, "and you'll eat your dinner through a straw for the rest of your life." Horace blustered something about law. Weston just stared until the man went pale. Then he left. The next day, Marin waited until the boys were off playing in the dust before confronting him behind the stable. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Didn't have to patch your roof either," Weston said. "Or teach Eli to carve. Or show Thomas how to plant onions. You trying to fix me?" "No," he said. "I don't think you're broken." She looked away. "You can't stay here," she muttered. "Not if people start talking. Let them talk. I don't want you thinking this means anything." "I don't need it to mean anything," he said. "I just don't like seeing people get hurt who don't deserve it." She sat down on the bench beside him, arms wrapped around her knees. "I don't know how to trust that," she whispered. "I don't need your trust," Weston said. "Just your honesty." She glanced sideways at him. "What do you want from me?" He looked down, then up at the sky. "I want the woman who didn't run. The one who took in 2 boys when she could barely feed herself. The one who didn't stop singing, even with a split lip." "I'm no angel, Weston," she said. "I'm not soft. I'm not clean. I'm not looking for soft," he said. "I'm looking for real." For a long time they sat in silence. The stars rose. The wind settled. Eli snored lightly nearby. "You planning to be here long?" she asked. "I don't plan," Weston said. "But I don't feel like leaving." She gave a dry laugh. "I've had men say prettier things and mean less. Pretty doesn't interest me." She leaned back, eyes to the sky. "I don't know how to be part of anything," she said. "I've spent so long surviving. I don't remember what else there is." He nodded. "I've been wandering long enough to forget what staying feels like." Another silence passed between them, comfortable this time. Then, softly, she said, "Maybe we're both too tired to run anymore." Weston didn't smile, but he didn't look away. And that night, when he laid his bedroll outside the barn and closed his eyes to the sound of children breathing and wind settling in the grass, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: stillness. The kind that means a man's found ground worth standing on. The trouble didn't start loud. It began with whispers. They circled Marin like vultures in Sunday hats. Quiet, persistent, judging. "She's a stain on the town," one woman muttered outside the church. "Children with no father. No ring, no shame." "She's got that drifter sleeping near her barn," said another. "A man with no home is no kind of man at all." They said it softly, but they said it often. And in a town like this, whispers had a way of growing teeth. The sheriff stopped nodding when he passed Weston in the street. The butcher raised prices when Marin bought scraps. The schoolteacher began offering Eli backhanded advice about knowing his place. And Weston saw it all. He saw how Marin held her head higher when the sneers came. How she stopped going to the general store altogether. How the boys played closer to the barn, less and less near town. Then one afternoon, Weston walked past the judge's office. Judge Vernon Langley, gray-bearded and long-tempered, called him over. "Weston Hayes," he said without greeting. "You've made yourself something of a spectacle." Weston said nothing. "I've received 3 letters in the past week. Complaints from store owners, churchgoers, respectable folks. All naming you. All worried about your influence." "My influence?" Weston asked. "You and the Holloway woman. She's done nothing wrong." Langley tapped his pen on the desk. "This is a delicate town. It survives on order. Reputation. She's not what we need drawing attention here. Because she's poor? Or because she survived what others wouldn't?" "Because she's not wanted," Langley said. "And neither are you." Weston didn't threaten, didn't raise his voice. He just said, "You'll have to decide what kind of man you are, Judge. The kind who listens to cowards, or the kind who protects what's right." Then he turned and walked out. That night, someone threw a stone through the window of the stable. No note, no name, just glass and silence. Weston swept it up before the boys woke. The next morning, they found their water bucket tipped over, the spout clogged with straw and mud. 2 days later, Eli came home with a black eye. Said nothing, just went to bed early. Weston sat outside that night, whittling a piece of cedar down to nothing. Marin came to stand beside him. "They want us gone," she said. "I know. You should go. Before they decide hurting you is easier than hating me." Weston didn't look up. "You think I stayed this long to run now?" She sat beside him, hands tight in her lap. "I don't know how to fight them all," she said. "I don't have land. I don't have rights. You have me." She looked at him then, long and quiet. "I used to think I was poison," she said. "That anyone who got close would end up burned." "I've already burned," Weston said. "What's left is fireproof." That night, they slept with the boys tucked close and a rifle near the door. But it didn't stop what came next. On the 5th night, someone lit a match. The lean-to where Marin and the boys slept went up in flames just after midnight. Eli screamed first. Thomas choked on smoke. Marin dragged them from the fire, coughing, stumbling barefoot into the dirt. Weston was already moving, shovel in hand, throwing sand and water. It wasn't enough. The flames licked fast, greedy, and cruel. Everything they'd built, blankets, tools, toys, burned in minutes. By dawn, all that remained was ash and silence. Marin sat in the dirt, holding Thomas tight, her eyes hollow. Eli stared at the blackened ground like it had betrayed him. Weston crouched beside them. "They could have killed us," Marin whispered. "They wanted to. I know. You think they'll stop?" "No." He looked at the town in the distance, smoke still rising faint from the fire's remnants. "They won't stop," he said. "But we're not alone anymore." She turned to him. "You mean you?" "I mean us." He stood and held out his hand. "We rebuild. You think a new wall will stop them?" "No," he said, "but standing behind it will." And so they rebuilt, together. The barn became home. The stable became shelter. Marin took shifts cleaning for a widow 2 towns over. Weston worked odd jobs in silence. Hauling water, breaking horses, chopping wood. Word spread. People muttered. But none of them came close again. Until the day Weston posted a notice at the town hall. It was just a piece of wood nailed to the door, written in neat, black ink. Land claimed. Hayes homestead. Family within. Protected. It wasn't legal. Not officially. But it was a line in the dirt. The judge saw it. So did the sheriff. So did every man and woman who'd once whispered. And that night, Weston waited on the edge of town, rifle slung across his shoulder, watching for the ones who thought silence was the same as surrender. They didn't come, but word had spread beyond. The next morning, 2 riders arrived from Prescott. Men in coats too clean for trail dust, with pens in their pockets and orders in their hands. They walked into the saloon and asked for the man living with the Holloway woman. When Weston entered, they stood. "You're Weston Hayes?" "I am." You're sheltering a woman of ill repute and her illegitimate children. That makes you an accomplice to public disorder. Weston didn't flinch. She's not disorder, he said. She's survival. They showed him papers, threatened fines, court dates, removal. Weston took the papers, folded them carefully, and dropped them in the stove behind the bar. I'm not leaving, he said. She isn't either. One of the men reached for his pistol. That's when Marin stepped through the saloon doors, holding Eli's hand. The whole room turned. Marin's face was calm. Her voice was steady. You want to drag a child through court? She asked. You want to shame a boy for not choosing who raised him? Neither man answered. She looked at Weston, then back at them. I've run from worse, she said. I've bled more than you'll ever know. But I'm done running. Weston stepped beside her. The saloon fell silent, and that silence held. For weeks, the men from Prescott didn't return. But the town began to shift. Slowly, reluctantly, a farmer offered Weston seed. A shopkeeper gave Marin thread. No charge. The sheriff looked away, but he didn't interfere. It wasn't peace, but it was the beginning. They gathered in the town hall at dusk. No official call, no posted notice. Just word passed from porch to porch until the benches filled with storekeepers, ranchers, deputies, and wives with folded arms. The judge sat in the front, flanked by the sheriff and the reverend. They weren't there for justice. They were there to remind Weston Hayes that decency had a face, and it wasn't his. He stood alone before them, coat dusty, hands weathered, calm as a man who had already made peace with whatever came next. I know what you think of me, Weston said. Of her. Of those boys. No one interrupted. The room was a stone. You see a woman with no husband and 2 mouths to feed. You see a man who should have moved on. You see disgrace. He reached into his coat and set something on the table before the judge. 3 small wooden toys, charred at the edges. A bear, a horse, and a bird with 1 wing. I carved these for children who hadn't smiled in months. They found joy again, laughed, slept through the night. He stepped back. And someone tried to burn that away. Marin stood in the back, holding Thomas, her arms shaking but her eyes clear. Eli leaned against the doorway, face bruised but proud. I've fought in wars, Weston said. I've seen cruelty and cowardice. But never did I think I'd see men try to silence hope in children because their mother wasn't pure enough for their taste. Silence cracked. Then a man stepped forward. A local, young, ashamed, hat in his hands. I set the fire, he said quietly. Didn't mean to hurt nobody. Just wanted 'em scared. No gasps, no shouts. Just a slow shift in the room. A tightening in shoulders. A lowering of eyes. The judge opened his mouth but said nothing. The sheriff turned away, and the townspeople began to file out. One by one, heads bowed, quiet, no votes cast, no verdict read. That night, for the first time in that town's memory, no one stayed up to gossip. They stayed awake to think. 1 year later, on the edge of town, a new home stood where there had once been dust and broken boards. It wasn't grand, just a cabin with a stone chimney, a hand-built fence, a coop with chickens pecking lazily in the yard. A small garden grew behind it, full of beans, squash, and stubborn roots that refused to die. Above the door hung a wooden sign, Hayes Homestead. Inside, the fire crackled low. A stew simmered on the stove, thick with potatoes and onions. Marin stood barefoot at the hearth, stirring slowly, humming under her breath. Her hair was pinned back, her face sun-touched. She wore no jewelry, just an apron stained with flour and a piece that had taken her years to earn. At the table, Weston sliced bread. The crust broke softly under his knife. Outside, Eli chased Thomas through a cloud of dust, both boys shrieking with laughter, their feet bare, their shirts loose. Thomas held the old wooden horse Weston had carved, a little scorched but still whole. They've been out there since sunup, Marin said, glancing through the window. They're boys, Weston replied. Dust is part of the uniform. She smiled faintly, then, after a moment, asked, You think we're really a family now? Weston looked up, eyes warm. Aren't we already? She turned from the window, her voice quieter. I used to think I wasn't built to be loved, she said. That something in me was too jagged, too ruined. He paused, wiping his hands. I used to think no one would let me love. Not for real. Not the way I meant it. She crossed the room and leaned beside him, her shoulder brushing his. I didn't know men like you existed. I didn't know women like you survived. They didn't kiss. They didn't cry. They just stayed. Together. Later, they sat on the porch as the sun sank behind the hills. The boys sprawled on the steps, too tired to keep chasing grasshoppers. Weston put his arm around Marin's shoulder. She rested her head against his chest. A breeze stirred the scent of sage and cooking stew, and in that quiet nothing needed saying. The world had not changed, but this little corner of it had. Bye-bye.